Welcome to Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. Thank you, NEK-TV, for always allowing us to bring the best shows to the people. We have a phenomenal group today. We have the State Ethics Commission, and we're going to be talking about some really great ethics bills and what's going on behind the scenes. And we have Ben Kinsley, the Executive Director of Campaign for Vermont. But I am going to actually allow each one of my guests to please introduce themselves first, give us your name, tell who is with the Ethics Commission, who is with Campaign for Vermont, and then we'll get started. So, Christina, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Christina Siverett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Ethics Commission, which I've been in this position since 2021.
Fantastic. TJ?
Sure. I'm TJ Jones. I'm a professor of government accountability and a consultant to the Vermont Ethics Commission on ethics matters.
Thank you so much for joining us. Ben?
Hi, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ben Kinsley. I'm the interim executive director for Campaign for Vermont. I've been involved in ethics reform in Vermont since 2012, I think, is when we first started looking at this issue. And I helped build the coalition that ultimately passed the bill that created the Ethics Commission, and then the subsequent bills that created the statewide code of ethics, and then the bill last year, which also expanded that to municipalities. So, been doing this for a little while.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to talk straight here. It started out with the Ethics Commission being formed and empowered. Who wants to run off with what you really thought those powers were going to be, and do you still have them?
That is a good question. So when I came on to the Ethics Commission in 2021, I was really tasked with trying to get legislation passed that would give the Ethics Commission, or make the Ethics Commission a real commission in Vermont. So when it was set up, I don't want to say in name only, but in a lot of ways in name only, because Vermont did not actually have a state code of ethics. Unlike almost every other state, we didn't have actual rules in place at the state level that applied to everyone. We had personnel policies in place in different agencies, but not an actual state code of ethics. So I was tasked with doing that as my, primary reason for being hired and my primary, work plan for the first year. And it was passed the first year that I was with the Ethics Commission. The state code of ethics was passed, and so it put the laws in place, but it didn't provide for an enforcement framework. And so since that time, what we've been trying to do is really build out the ethics framework in Vermont, because we started from zero. So we got the law in place. So there's now actually, state laws that people have to follow and in state government. Then, as Ben mentioned, we expanded that to municipalities, because the majority of calls and requests that we get in our office are related to municipal ethics. And then last year, we also got hearing and investigatory powers for the Ethics Commission, but not the staff to effectuate that. So that's kind of where things sit right now.
So there's always the who cares if somebody does something wrong if they're an elected official, because it's all determined at the ballot box. Have you found issues with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a misconception that the state code of ethics only applies to elected officials. So on the state level, it applies to every public servant serving the state of Vermont. So very few of those are going to be elected officials, and same at the municipal level. So it covers, a broad variety of municipal officials at the municipal level. And I think that when it comes to putting rules in place, it really shouldn't matter your status as to how you got to the position that you're in, but it matters when it comes to what the enforcement protocol might look like, but not when it comes to what rules should apply.
So enforcement, to me, is a vital part of accountability and empowerment, and the ability for anyone to do their job. And how could you actually go out there as a commission and not have that enforcement authority? Because who would you go to? to make something happen if you found something inappropriate or something you would want to recommend was done?
Yeah, and so right now we don't have enforcement powers, even with hearing and investigatory powers at the state level, not at the municipal level. We don't have the ability to enforce any of our findings. So what we do now is when we get a complaint into our office, we refer it on to another body that does have that power. So in the case of a legislator, that would be the House or Senate ethics panels. In a case of municipality, that will be whoever the municipality is designated to be the investigatory power. When it comes to executive branch, it'd be the Department of Human Resources. And so what changed for us last year when we got the hearing and investigatory powers is that we asked for a consultation requirement to be built into the legislation that was passed last year. And what the consultation requirement does is it requires those investigatory bodies, when we refer a complaint that comes through our office only, so it's only those complaints that come through our office that get referred to somebody else, to consult with us on the application of the state code of ethics to those complaints. And the reason that we asked for that is because we really want to make sure that the state code of ethics is being applied in a uniform way. So it's one thing to set the same standards for everyone, but then the next layer is how are those standards interpreted. So we want to make sure that everyone throughout government is interpreting and applying the state code of ethics in the same way. So what we did last year is we asked for a consultation requirement as kind of a way to promote uniformity and education about the state code of ethics, because it is new. And so very few people in state government are familiar with it yet. To be honest, we're tasked with being the ones who have the most knowledge about the state code of ethics. So it's a way for us to share that knowledge.
Has anybody found that the administration, the executive branch versus the legislative branch versus the judiciary branch, are they in conflict, or are they all aligned with their wanting more power and authority and enforcement to go to the commission? Anyone can, TJ, if you want it, or...
Yeah, I think this is a great question because it really goes back to the beginning of the conversation.
And this is Ben speaking, by the way. If you just so that the audience knows, because you're not here, it's like because we're actually virtual. So just say who you are, like, hi, it's Ben, so that people know.
Hi, it's Ben. Yes, this goes back to like the original conversations that happened around ethics and how to set the framework up. So we had bills that were introduced in 2015, 2016, and 2017. 2017 bill is the one that made it through to create the commission. And this was a debate even back then. And there was some reluctance to having independent oversight over anybody in state government, even though the vast majority of states had independent ethics oversight. And that remains true today. So there was a sort of reluctance. So the approach that was taken by the legislature was this go slow approach, and then add on more things afterwards. So the first step was set up the commission, see how it operates, let the commission build trust, both from public officials but also from the public itself, that it establishes some legitimacy in terms of its advisory role that it plays, and then add those powers later on. So we're approaching a decade later, and we've expanded the scope of the commission in terms of, the statewide code of ethics, which is a positive step of like, okay, here is the stick that we're measuring against, right? Here is the standard that we expect for the conduct of public officials. That's what the statewide code of ethics did. And then the role of the commission is to interpret that. So I think, this has been an evolving journey to get there. And to Christina's point, there is no real enforcement authority from the Ethics Commission today. 43 other states do have ethics commissions that have enforcement authority. So Vermont is a bit of an outlier in that respect. And today, as Christina was saying, since the Ethics Commission can't enforce, they can investigate and make recommendations, but they can't bring an enforcement action. So that enforcement action is taken by the very agency that the complaint is targeting. So that doesn't feel great to the general public, as you can imagine. If a complaint gets forwarded for some sort of enforcement action to the boss of the person that you're complaining about, or, in this case, the peers of the person that you're filing a complaint about. So you can kind of imagine how that seems to the public.
So here's a question, TJ, maybe you want to jump in on this, and if it's not the one you want to take, just throw it to whoever like it. Sure. Would you like to see this commission actually become the regulatory body over ethics, and then maybe have a distinct avenue for enforcement, which is not the fox watching the hen house? Or so how would you like to see this happen? Almost like SEC versus PCAOB kind of setup? Or how would you like to see this actually happen to ensure that there really is accountability here?
Sure. TJ Jones. I'm the consultant to the Vermont Ethics Commission. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
One of the things that Vermont has done exceptionally well is this idea of the slow rollout that Mr. Kinsley was speaking of. That the planning out of this commission really was very good, in the sense that a lot of commissions in the United States evolve in response to a scandal, and so the response to the scandal sets up a department that is, well, it's built to respond to whatever scandal has happened. Vermont didn't do it that way. Vermont came out and had a plan for the gradual rollout of this. And it's been very good so far. With respect to enforcement, one of the confusions that people have is enforcement is really the smallest part of what any ethics agency does. Enforcement is really for those 0.1% of people who understand the code of ethics, but refuse to abide by it. And again, that's very few people. I mean, Vermont has a very strong culture of ethical government. And so we're really talking about only a few people to whom enforcement would matter. So what's important, and what Vermont has been doing, is to roll out this education and advice platform, where they can educate all government officials about what the rules should be, and then a private advice function for those people who, like, I get what the rule is, but I want to make sure that I'm on the right side of the law. And all that has been working to date. So it seems fair that when you initiate an enforcement mechanism, everybody understands what the rules are. If you're going to punish people for violating the rules, it's fair to have them understand the rules first. Vermont's kind of at that place, and has been at that place for, a year or so now. So the time is right for some type of enforcement mechanism to roll out now. And that would make Vermont consistent with, as Ben said, the vast majority of states out there. And that enforcement power, like the jurisdiction of the agency, really should be across the board, with one caveat that I'll get to. And by being across the board, there's a common understanding of what the rules are, and there's a common understanding of what the punishment is going to be. The one caveat that keeps coming up, not just in Vermont, but in a number of states, is this, I'll call it a misunderstanding of where the role of the commission fits in. It's an independent body, and again, enforces a code of ethics, and the code of ethics applies to everybody. But there are certain things constitutionally that the independent enforcement agency can't do. For example, and this comes up quite a bit, anything that's within a core legislative function, well, that's set forth in the Constitution. So if it's a core legislative function, well, the legislature has its specific, unique authority to govern the membership of its body. So there's this misunderstanding that keeps coming up, and it's happened, with reference to your first question. It happens with both the judicial and legislative branches in a lot of states, where the Ethics Commission says, no, we don't enforce anything that's within your constitutional authority. And in fact, if you think about it, the commission doesn't want to do that. That's already covered. That's been covered since the Constitution, this core legislative function or the judicial function with respect to the judiciary. And so this confusion keeps coming up. And I think that's muddied the water with respect to the progress of the Ethics Commission. The Ethics Commission doesn't address any of those core constitutional functions. And yet there's this fear, both with the legislative branch and the judicial branch, that the Ethics Commission will start doing that. And I think that's what slowed what was previously the really good progress with respect to ethics in Vermont.
And TJ, I think in terms of like what we would consider or what from a constitutional perspective you would consider core legislative function and core judicial function, basically what we're talking about here is the Ethics Commission can't censor a legislator. They can't block a legislator from voting because voting is a core legislative function. They can't block committee assignments, like those things that are exclusively the legislator's purview. It's things like accepting bribes or gifts or things like that that are not constitutionally a core legislative function. Those are the areas where independent ethics commissions have jurisdictions. And in terms of enforcement, I think most of what I see, I'm curious what your perspective is on this, but mostly what I see from, in other states from enforcement actions that an ethics commission might bring is mostly going to be fines for some sort of violation. And the same thing with the judiciary, like the ethics commission doesn't have, can't say, no, you can't make a decision on something, right? Deciding a judicial matter is core to the judicial branch and, is their own purview to say this judge can preside over this case or not, right? It's not the place of the ethics commission. But if a violation did occur, the mechanism I think I typically see is a fine of some sort. Is that a fair assessment, or are there other mechanisms?
Absolutely. There are a few states that the sole punishment under their ethics code is a criminal prosecution. But as a matter of reality, that just never happens at a state level. I mean, there are very few criminal proceedings at the state level that take place in response to an ethics violation. Now, the Federal Department of Justice has their own division that will prosecute these to the extent that they're involved in interstate traffic. So a lot of the headlines you read about criminal prosecutions of state officials for ethics violations are the federal government. But a state code of ethics that only has a criminal prosecution never works, which is why most states have, as Ben says, simply fines. And some states also have injunctive relief, which amounts to, and you can't do this again. You've been doing this, you got to stop doing it.
TJ,
So fines, and sure.
Go ahead. No, finish. Go ahead.
So fines and this injunctive relief is the norm among most states.
So would you like to see more of the way, say, attorneys' licenses or CPA licenses are overseen at more of a professional responsibility board where you have the option to assess what type of enforcement, whether it be a negotiation or some recommendation, not just a demand that this is what happens? Would you like to see that? And then how would somebody go and appeal a decision? Where does the judiciary fit in on what's going on right now?
Sure. With respect to those sort of professional areas where there's a governing board, attorneys, accountants, they all have professional boards that they report to. But their professional duties are 99% different from the Code of Ethics. There are a few places where they overlap. So we're not talking about dual jurisdiction for most of these. And what they're doing in the state of Vermont with respect to those professional licenses is sound and good, and it's working. So the Ethics Commission doesn't plan on taking away any authority from the professional boards. These lie side by side. They're different areas of accountability that they address. And so if you're asking me what I'd like to see, with respect to the jurisdiction, I like what Vermont's doing, and it's worked in other states as well. It is kind of a norm to have that sort of dual jurisdiction, a jurisdiction over the profession and a jurisdiction over the state conduct. So that's working right now in the state of Vermont.
So if
You
there
asked
were a
about the-
finding, if there were a finding by the Ethics Commission, would you be mandated to refer, if it was a professional, refer that licensed professional over to their regulating board, identifying what your finding was?
Not now. There's nothing in the code of ethics.
I'm saying, is that where you want to go, or are you not even focused on that at this point?
That would be a sound practice. Typically, by the time the Ethics Commission would get around to investigating something, the Professional License Board has always, almost always taken it up.
Yeah,
And
except they would need an actual complaint filed
Yes.
for them to take action or even begin an investigatory process. So they would kind of sit out there waiting. If nobody files a complaint, then oh well.
Right, unless the commission forwarded the complaint that they received,
Right.
and there's no requirement that they do so today. And I think one of the things that, TJ sort of alluded to that's helpful in the context of like professional, professionals that have licenses, like lawyers are one that comes up a lot, financial advisors, folks like that. They have their own professional requirements that is specific to their occupation as the professional occupation is, whatever field they're in, doctors, for example. And those are focused on very specific things to that occupation. The code of ethics is focused on your conduct as a public official, right? So you can be both a public official and a doctor or a lawyer or a financial advisor or an investment banker or whatever it is. And this is one of the areas that, when we talk about, Vermont is, above board most of the time and whatnot. But one of the things we kind of overlook in the legislature specifically is that we have a citizen legislature, right? And so all of these folks have a life outside of their legislative responsibilities. And a lot of them are doctors and lawyers and are subject to those rules as a doctor and lawyer. But as TJ said, a lot of those are focused specifically on the occupation. And so, the ethics rules are really sort of separate because they're focused on their conduct as a public official, not their conduct as a doctor or a lawyer or whatever else.
Except, Ben, there are specific licenses that say if you are a public official that these rules do go forward and carry over, and you still have a responsibility as a higher fiduciary. So there is going to be a blend at what point in time. We'll figure that out. But my main question right now is, we know that there's an issue or a debate on the bill that's out there with what the legislature wants to do and how they would like to be exempt. So they're turning around and they're saying, go out there, have governance over the world, but not us. So, Christine, you want to jump in on this one a little bit and tell us what's going on up there at the House?
Yeah. And I can just give a quick overview about how things work now when we get a complaint. So when we're talking about hearing investigatory powers for the Ethics Commission, those haven't gone into effect yet. They go into effect, I think it's next September. So the way it works now, if somebody were to file a complaint and it related to an attorney, then we look at the complaint. If it only related to the rules of professional responsibility, our recommendation is for that person to file directly with the Professional Responsibility Board. If it's a mix of the state code of ethics and the rules of professional responsibility, then we're going to forward that. We're forwarding everything over, but we're forwarding that over to the Professional Responsibility Board. In the future, if it's a complaint that relates only to the state code of ethics, that's when we're looking at, the Ethics Commission actually investigating the complaint, because the behavior that you're talking about isn't something that, somebody is required to be an attorney to do. It isn't, talking about, regulating an attorney in their profession. It's talking about regulating them in their role as a state employee, just like any other state employee. And so where we kind of are stuck now is that we don't actually have the staff to do this. We have 2 part-time people working in our office, one executive director, one administrative assistant. And so some of this conversation is a bit moot until we actually get more staff. But what we're seeing now is last year, the legislature was quite willing to really look at what Vermont needed when it comes to building out our ethics frameworks. What are the next steps? And they passed a really big ethics package last year. This year, unfortunately, what we're seeing is a rollback of some of that. And the specific rollback that we're seeing now is trying to exempt the legislature from the consultation requirement. And they're using constitutional grounds as the reason for why they feel like they need to do this. We disagree with that because when we're talking about core legislative functions that TJ mentioned, which are voting, committee assignments, those are already exempt from the State Code of Ethics. So when we're talking about consulting with the State Ethics Commission on complaints related to legislators, we're already only talking about what is covered by the State Code of Ethics. So that's going to be gift acceptance, misusing your position in some way that isn't related to a core legislative function. But what the House has done, and specifically the House Government Operations Committee put forward a bill that would exempt the House and Senate ethics panel from the consultation requirement. And so it would be creating a different standard for them than it would for the other branches of government, which is what our strong objection is to, because we feel like once you pass the law, it should apply to everyone equally. And all that the consultation requirement does is it kind of forces engagement where there might not previously have been engagement on specifically the State Code of Ethics, not core legislative functions. And it's confidential advice and it's non-binding advice. And so it's really, things are still being kind of, I don't know how to put it, but it's behind the scenes. No one actually has to follow our advice, but it's just to promote the understanding of it. And we're just concerned that if you're trying to roll back that this year, then what is the future going to look like when it comes to rolling back other parts of the ethics framework that have been put in place the last couple of years?
And Christine, I think there was quite a lot of excitement by the public when the commission was brought forth and actually established. I think the public wanted that accountability. Yeah. Whether they looked at the details of what was going on or not, which is always the issue, but they wanted accountability. And I don't think to the public that this, well, you can't talk about us or talk to us attitude or wear a higher standard than everybody else, this non-discriminatory look at everything, is pleasant for the people of Vermont to hear. And so with that, what's the tension going on? I mean, what is your feel? Do you think that you're going to actually grab control of this, or do you think that the legislature is going to win?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. To TJ's previous point, he said Vermont has been really good at doing the slow roll. And I think that a lot of the resistance that we're getting now is that people aren't used to things that are very basic already in other states. And so people in other states are quite used to the idea of accountability coming with the ethics framework, and specifically independent third party outside accountability. Like there are ethics commissions with powers in other states. And so I think a lot of the pushback that we're getting is because it's just very new here. And I think for a lot of people, it's a bit surprising because it is very standard when you look at what's happening in other states. So we're talking about what's going to happen this year. I think it's still an open question. I think that when we were, working on the House side, we really tried to put forward the best argument we could. Things went through very, very quickly. We're now in the Senate, and I think when we're looking at the Senate Government Operations Committee, just speaking frankly, they have more experience for a longer period of time working with the ethics legislation. So they're just much more familiar with the issues, including the constitutional issues that are being put forward. And so I think we are expecting more of a robust conversation that's really looking at, not just the bill is called H1, not just H1 this year, but its potential impact in the future. And I do think I have high expectations for there being a genuinely robust conversation with the Senate side.
That's good to hear.
Just started.
And that's actually good to hear. What do you think, anybody who wants to jump in here, as far as accountability-wise, what is the big fear that they have? Is it just losing control? Is that we only want our buddies to make these determinations? We don't want anything to come out of the State House. I mean, let's talk straight here. What's
Yeah.
the fear?
I think it is. I think it is that. I think you kind of hit it. It's the fear of giving up control, right? So today, the legislature has control. The House and Senate ethics panels, which were created as part of that 2017 bill, by the way, they didn't exist before then, and the fear is that they're giving up control. I think is the fear, and the reality is, this is the trade-off that almost every other state has made. 43 other states have made the decision to give up some of that control to an independent body in order to ensure public faith in the process, right? The term you used earlier was the fox guarding the hen house. And that is how it appears, I think, to the general public when, a complaint is forwarded to one of these House and Senate ethics panels and these folks' peers are looking at it and saying, oh, well, I know this person, they would never do this, right? Or never intend harm by doing this. And so even if, and this is a point I try to make a lot, and as part of the trade-off here, is that when an ethics panel makes a finding like that, oh, nothing happened here, an independent body is saying nothing happened here, the public can trust that finding. Right. And TJ mentioned before, 99% of complaints ultimately don't end in some sort of enforcement action. It's either the person was unaware, they weren't maliciously trying to do something. And so when the Ethics Commission says, an independent body says the person has addressed the issue or there was no issue here to begin with, that feels a lot better. The public will have more faith in that process than they would the House or Senate panel saying, that nothing happened here. There's nothing to see here, right? And that's for us our biggest
fear of the conflict of interest. I mean, and the understanding is that if there's any member on the commission that has a conflict of interest, they naturally would identify that and remove themselves from any of the panel decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so, what if there is a decision? Maybe TJ, you know this, or Christina, if there is a decision made by the commission in, say, the person wants to appeal it, what's that process? If there is one.
I can tell you what works in other states. And to mitigate against this fear of giving up control to an independent agency, most states have a right of appeal to the trial courts of the state. Whatever ruling or finding the commission has, if they impose a punishment, the person who's subject to that punishment can appeal immediately. And in most states, that's taken up de novo by the trial court, meaning that they don't have to listen to the ethics commission if they don't want to. They can have a whole new trial if they want to, from ground zero. So that's kind of the norm, and that's how most states navigate this balance between public officials or legislators wanting to maintain control and not really trusting the commission, is this idea that whatever the commission does, if you think it's wrong, you could appeal it to the Superior Court.
Okay, so then that's very important for people to understand. So now there's also the issue of the municipality, local government, and getting under the control of the commission. And that was part of the bills and part of the discussion, and who was out there with signs saying no, 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 who was out there with signs saying yay, yay, yay. So what have you found regarding the push down to the control over the ethics in municipalities?
I say it's important to note that we don't actually have control. I think that's a misconception over municipalities when it comes to ethics. So it's kind of we're tracking this states what's happened at the state level, at the municipal level. So what happened was the legislature put into effect a statewide code of ethics for municipalities, and so those rules are now in place, and we can provide advice when it comes to the statewide municipal code of ethics, but we don't actually have any power over it. Like our services. Our services are services. Our powers are limited to providing advice. So we don't actually have any control over that. And when it comes to complaints that are filed with our office related to municipal officials, those are referred back to the municipality for investigation. That was something that kind of came about last year because enforcement when it comes to municipalities was not part of the conversation when the municipal code of ethics was passed, and that was intentional because people knew that that was going to be something that was going to take a lot of time to really work out. So for now, it goes back to the municipalities. We did put forward recommendations this year in our annual report for what an eventual enforcement protocol might look like, and trying to find the balance between maintaining local control and having like an independent, oversight or independent, look at, municipal complaints. And so our recommendation was that initial investigations happen at the municipal level, but people have the right of appeal to an independent body that could be the State Ethics Commission. It could be a separate state board that's set up specifically for that purpose. But that would be our recommendation for what could eventually happen. But right now, everything really stays with the municipality when it comes to enforcement.
So they have their own policies and procedures and they can deal with it. It's just pretty much if you hear something or somebody wants to file something, you can bring it there. It's sent back to the municipality for their own decision making, but recommended guidelines. What's the feel for whether this could actually go higher up and become under the state commission, your ethics commission? What's the feel in the House before we even get to the Senate for this? Do we know if they want to draw in the municipalities more or they want to stay away from it? There's always that control. When I was in the legislature, that was always a hot topic. Municipality control versus local government versus state. So what's the flavor there?
I think one of the things that, and Christine has been pretty close to this, so she can probably speak to it as well. But I think one of the things that's really important here when we're starting to talk about enforcement, particularly enforcement and investigation capability for municipalities, is the workload that comes with that, right? So really, it's not so much that that the legislature is actively opposed to independent oversight for municipalities. It's more that the current staffing levels of the commission wouldn't support that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that there's a difference between the approach that we're seeing the House take this year versus last year. So last year, I really felt like there was a hard, honest look at what was needed when it comes to ethics in Vermont and what the framework needs. This year, we've seen like a rolling back of that. So it really leaves open the question of what's going to happen in the future, to be honest.
And if I can chime in on that.
Sure, TJ.
All right,
I was just going to put it in context that we are seeing across the country this sort of rollback of the forward progress of ethics. And it may be that states are taking their cue from the federal government. But across the country, we're seeing various ways that states are trying to roll back the authority of the Ethics Commission. And the concern is that two elements are at play in the state of Vermont that are at play in other states. That the way that you can take away authority is, first by saying, we don't have to listen to you, and that's in play with H1. But there's this also subtle way that states take power away from the commission, and that's through the budget process. And so if you don't have personnel to act upon even giving advice to people, well, you can see that the writing is on the wall for the demise of the Ethics Commission. And right now, with one part-time executive director and one part-time assistant, it really is. Most states at this stage would have 4 full-time employees, at least 1 full-time attorney on staff, and that's before they get to the enforcement function. That's to have a robust education and advice platform with the eye on eventually having enforcement, but usually the focus of an office is not on that enforcement mechanism. But with a half-time executive director and a half-time administrative assistant, it really is not a plan for success to going forward.
So controlling the purse strings, you hit it right there, okay? Bottom line is if they want to control what's going on at the commission, they're going to control the purse strings, right? I mean, that's a very powerful tool. So how do you get more money? Who are you convincing of the need? When you're in there testifying, which committees, which is it a whole a thread going through each committee that says, don't give them any more money? Or is there some committee that says, you know what, we really want you to become a full-fledged commission? What is your feel going on there? Or are they just not even looking at that right now?
So last year we asked for two additional staff people to go with our additional responsibilities, a staff attorney and a legal counsel. We did not get them last year. We asked again this year. And so, I'm relatively new to the budget process, to be honest. So I testified before appropriations, both in the House and the Senate, and the House and Senate Government Operations Committees make recommendations. So this year I went before House Appropriations and asked for two new staff members. The House Committee on Government Operations have the ability to make recommendations. They initially were going to recommend zero new positions for us. They ultimately recommended one. The House Appropriations Committee was going to recommend one position for us. And then at the last minute, they removed that recommendation. So the recommendation was for us to get zero. So it is, and that happened at the last minute just a few days ago. And so now we are on the Senate side. I just testified before Senate Appropriations. They seem very open-minded to our request. I don't know what's going to happen there, but it was quite, I'll just say, disturbing to find out that, the House ultimately decided to recommend zero positions for our commission, which is really seriously understaffed, and it has been for the last 3 years.
So let's talk about how you get on the commission, where the appointments come from.
So our commissioners are appointed mainly by community organizations, so the League of Women Voters, SHRM, the Human Resources Organization. Last year, we expanded the commission for the first time to add 2 additional commissioners, one appointed by the Speaker of the House and one by the Senate Committee on Committees. And part of that is because we kind of need to move to a place where we have more appointments being made by government officials. We don't yet have an appointment being made by the governor, which one is one of the most important ones. But as we move forward with more powers, we do need to be a commission that doesn't have appointees solely coming from community organizations. And that's because of, kind of offloading government services to community organizations and getting into constitutional questions there.
Why do you think that the governor was, and maybe I'm not understanding, the governor was not granted the authority to appoint somebody on this commission?
I can answer that question.
Okay, please.
Because we helped design it originally. And the reason why we had no government appointments on the commission to start with was, and knowing that was going to evolve over time, but the reason we started there was because we didn't want the commission to turn into a political apparatus. One of the things that will erode trust in an independent commission like that faster than just about anything is to become a political weapon. And
so you think, Ben, that having the stakeholders or organizations, community organizations outside doing these appointments is not a political push?
We intentionally chose organizations that were professional and apolitical, and so
tell me about that. How did you tell me who they are?
So
who's apolitical? What organization is apolitical out there? I'd love to.
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. Like what commission, what organization, community organization is apolitical? But the idea was that the legislature would not have control of the commission, neither would the administrative branch, neither would the judicial branch, at least at first. And then over time, as we got to an enforcement powers discussion, like we're still probably a couple of years away from really having that meaningfully. that the commission would evolve. And last year we added members of the or appointees from the legislature. We were supportive of that as it's, the commission continues to evolve.
Right, and that's my big question is, why add them and not the governor's appointment? Why not do it at the same time?
That is a good question.
That's two good questions.
I can answer that in a sense that, so what happened last year is municipal ethics was a big topic. And initially the Vermont League of Cities and Towns was proposed to have 2 appointments to the commission so that we can ensure that we had people who had municipal experience on the commission. As we were debating the bill, it came to our attention that the Vermont League of Cities and Towns insure municipalities against the conduct that is in the statewide municipal code of ethics, and that creates a conflict of interest, a financial conflict of interest. So we had to kind of find a new path forward in terms of who else could be an appointing authority and also capture the municipal experience. And we're talking about the legislative appointments. They are required to appoint someone who has served as a municipal official in the past. So we're getting that experience as part of the commission. When it came down to who was going to be making the appointment, the legislature versus the governor, to be honest, it was just kind of a last minute discussion. And because the legislature was proposed to have 1 appointment, but because there's, the House and the Senate, it was hard to decide who might do it. So they went with giving the 2 appointments to the legislature. But we have always, said we really need to see a governor appointee, whether it's an additional member of the commission or whether it's converting one of the existing appointments, community organization appointments, to a governor's appointment.
Yeah,
Can the commission be sued?
I mean, I think we're looking at yeah, sorry, go ahead, TJ.
I didn't hear the question.
Can the commission be sued?
I mean, it's as a matter of law, it's an unsatisfying answer, but everybody can be sued. But
Right, and I'm there with you. Yeah, but I'm saying, but somebody wants to file a lawsuit. They file a lawsuit against the commission? And who is that? Or is there something that you're going to put in the bill that says, if there are issues with the commission, this is going to be the process?
You can imagine that across the United States, there have been clever attorneys who have attempted this in the past.
Yeah. And where I'm going, TJ, is let's say the clever attorney comes about and you are sued. Who's your attorney? Since you don't have these appointments in the budget, who represents the commission?
I think it's going to be the Attorney General's office.
I was going to say okay. Attorney General, yeah, because they're essentially suing the state. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where I was trying to get the hierarchy of what's going on so that the public understands. Okay, I wasn't being facetious, though I was being facetious. But I just kind of wanted to get the hierarchy out there. So it's the Attorney General who steps into play here, right?
One would think.
Probably. Right. Would you think that you would want to actually have as one of the additions to the bill a specific attorney that is assigned to represent the commission?
That is part of our request, but that really is a request related to complaint investigations, not, anticipating future lawsuits. And we don't have enforcement powers, even with the bill in its current form before it gets rolled back. So in terms of, lawsuits against the commission, I don't think that's something that would really, arise until we actually, had enforcement authority and somebody objected to a finding. But the legal counsel position that we requested for the office is really related to complaint investigation and, potential hearings. So I can just say with the authority that we've been given but has not gone into effect yet, the way we see this going is that we're not going to be able to investigate every complaint that comes to our office. We're really going to have to pick and choose. So the ones that we'd be handling would be the very much the lower level complaints. We have the ability to, enter into resolution agreements. So say somebody, there's a minor infraction in the state code of ethics, you enter into a resolution agreement with them saying, if the facts of this complaint are true, before we even get to an investigation stage, if you agree the facts are true, then we can agree that there's been a violation of the state code of ethics. Let's enter an agreement where you agree to take more training. You're not going to do it again. So those are the kind of things that we would be doing with our existing, authority when it goes to effect. And then there's the other situations where there's not a referral entity for every type of complaint. So for example, statewide elected officials, commissions, there's no person to refer that complaint to. You can't refer them to the Board of Responsibility if it's talking about the State Code of Ethics or Department of Human Resources. So those are the other category of complaints that practically speaking would be investigating or working on within our office. And in order to do that, we do need a legal counsel position.
Are you able to, as a commission, do you have the authority to hire outside attorneys to assist you?
I think it's a matter of the budget. We don't
right.
have the
I'm
budget
saying if you had the magic wand of you were fully funded, and do you have the power? Is there that empowerment within your charge to go outside, or must you stay within the Attorney General's, the person who you deal with?
No, I mean, so right now, we have 2 consultants actually in our office because we are overloaded with work, so we can't handle it, just with what staffing that we have. So TJ is one of our consultants, but in terms of like a local attorney, we do have a contract with a local attorney who's working on municipal issues for us when it comes to advisory opinions and that sort of thing. So we are able to hire, attorneys on contract.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to find out, is you can't just work with the 2 people in the office and say, we hope that this happens. I mean, there has to be some momentum going. As slow as the process is, you still need to be doing your due diligence, you need to be doing your research, you need to have legal advice, and you have TJ there for the best practices, which I want to get to right now. So TJ, tell the public, what does best practices mean?
Well, I can tell you what the norm is across the nation, and the norm has been working for the vast majority of states. And it starts with an independent commission with sufficient budget. And Vermont has that independent commission now. Most states set up their commissions. The typical framework is that the executive branch has appointments, the legislature has appointments. No party can have a majority on the commission. It's always an odd numbered commission, but they're usually people who, for lack of a better term, are stakeholders, people who are subject to the code themselves, appoint people, and it's balanced politically. And then there's the budget issue, and that's where, at least in Vermont right now, there's some pick and shovel work to be done.
So we have 3 professionals, the 3 of you. You're fantastic, and I greatly appreciate your being here. What I'd like to hear from each of you is, what's your top priority now? What do you need done, and where are you going to go on these bills? And how are you going to get there? So I want everybody to kind of take it and say, this is what I need to do. And what's the shot of it actually happening? Who wants to go first?
I don't mind going first. I have no horse in this race, but I can tell you what works and what I believe would work best for Vermont. And the first is budgeting, to make sure that whatever the appropriations are, I told you it's 4 or 5 employees that would typically be in an office at this stage of development. I don't believe that that's even on the table. I mean, the legislature is talking about 0 positions. And the other part is, put enforcement to the side right now. You really have to, one of the most important things about a code of ethics is to have everybody singing off the same sheet of music, to have everybody have a common understanding of what the rules are. And you can't have that if you have anybody, let alone a legislative body, saying, thank you very much, we're just not going to listen to you. So if this session has success on those 2 issues, I think that's a good step moving forward for the commission right now. Okay.
Christine?
Yeah, I mean, we have 2 co-equal priorities for this session. One is to get staffing because, a lot of the discussions about, the Ethics Commission's powers and what we're going to be able to do going forward really depends on us having staff. And if we don't get the staff, we're really going to be in a situation where we're just keeping the lights on. And so that and that, in turn creates a situation where people become less satisfied with the Ethics Commission because we're not doing a good job of providing the services that we're supposed to be providing. And that's going to be due to lack of staff. So we really, really need additional staff for our office. And I think we're looking at what's going on in the country right now. I think TJ mentioned earlier, we want to buck that trend. We want to continue moving forward with ethics instead of being one of the states that's also moving backward with ethics. So we really, in order to do that, we need more staff. And then the other priority of the session has been H1, because we just see that as a really, kind of dangerous sign of where things could go, especially next year when it comes to rolling back the progress that we've made. Because I think a lot of people see H1 and the attempt to exempt the legislature from the consultation requirement as being something minor, but it's really the reasoning behind it that is, I would say, dangerous for the ethics framework in Vermont, because if it's successful this year, then I think next year and in future years, the reasoning is going to be used over and over again to roll back the powers of the Ethics Commission until we're at a point where potentially we're really only looking at the Ethics Commission having jurisdiction when it comes to executive branch in a meaningful way. And that is a place that we do not want to be, because the Ethics Commission's position has always been, when we pass something, it needs to apply to everyone equally. And when you start, kind of disturbing that principle, that's when we're getting into a territory we end up with a framework that I don't think is serving the state well.
And I agree with you there 100%, because the bottom line is, if it gets to that point, then forget this apolitical concept. I mean, we're down to, hey, veto's a 4-letter word, right? And so the bottom line is, it's all or pretty much dismantled, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you don't want to go. Ben, do you want to get in? I'd like to hear a little bit more about H1.
Yeah, and I think that is, not to sound like a broken record, I think the staffing thing is really important. But H1, I think, is really concerning. And that's actually, for me, probably my number one issue. And to Christina's point, it's more the reasoning behind it, the logic that's being used, less than the actual language in H1. The argument behind it is that, there should not be independent oversight over the legislature, because any sort of independent oversight is a violation of the separation of powers in the Vermont Constitution. And if you follow that logic all the way through, we're never going to have independent oversight over the legislature or a consistent code of ethics that applies to all public officials, which I think, in my opinion, is what Vermonters expect, is that regardless of who that person is, what part of state government they serve in, there's a basic set of standards that we expect public officials to meet in terms of their conduct. And I think that the logic behind H1 is concerning. The House passed it very quickly. That's a relatively new committee. These constitutional arguments have gone all the way back to the very beginning of the conversation around ethics in Vermont. They've been debunked over and over again. The House, a lot of those members in the House committee have not been there long enough to have been there for those conversations in the past. But I am hopeful that the Senate committee makeup is different. They do have a couple new members, but they also have members that have been there since the very beginning, like Senator Clarkson, and Senator Collmore, is the chair of that committee, is not all the way back to the beginning, but pretty far back. And so
well seasoned.
So I think that the Senate and all the ethics bills so far, well, not all of them, the one that created the commission originated in the Senate. So they were the original architects of that bill. So I think that I'm more hopeful about what's going to happen in the Senate, and some of the reactions. They had an initial hearing on H1 in the Senate this past week, and some of the initial reactions, one senator even said, like, if the House really understood these issues, we never would have gotten this bill. So that's a positive sign that they're going to take it a little slower and really do the due diligence on this. So that's
I have concerns that it went through the House so quickly. And was it that it went through the House so quickly because their mindset is, this is what is going to happen, and we are not going to be open for discussion? Or is it that we don't understand the issues, or a combination of both? But the bottom line is, this to me still is control. Nobody's going to tell us what to do. And that's not the whole premise of setting up this ethics commission. So it's almost a pullback, it's a rollback.
It feels that way.
And I have grave concerns here. So hoping that that it is in the Senate and that there are more seasoned senators out there, and I do believe that they will look at this and look at the alleged rationale. I mean, everybody could rationalize anything, right? But really see what is the underlying reason for this rationale.
Mhm.
And so I have concerns. Where's the administration on this? Do we know?
We don't know. They haven't weighed in. I would say that, we found the administration to be generally supportive of, ethics. We intentionally don't engage, too much with the different branches of government outside of, specific issues related to ethics. When we have ethics legislation, each year kind of do a check-in. But, they haven't publicly weighed in on this one way or the other. I can just say we generally found them to be supportive of ethics. To your point about where the bill originated, I mean, I don't know the answer to that in terms of, where the specific push is coming from, but I will say that it did very much have the feeling of a bill where it was decided in advance that it was going to pass out of the House committee before testimony was even heard. But I do think there were many members of the committee that were not, part of that decision. So they were really struggling with the issues because they were new to the issues and trying to understand them. But ultimately, it was kind of predetermined that it was going to get out of House government operations.
Has
Yeah,
there
Linda,
been... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They scheduled a vote on the second day of testimony in the House. So that tells you, as a former legislator, I think that tells you a lot about
Certainly does.
what's happening.
Well, and it shouldn't go unnoticed that it's H1. It was
Right.
the first bill introduced in the House. So it shows that there is some definite movement behind it to get this going as fast as possible.
Right. Was there any discussion, and maybe it's too premature, was there any discussion with the state auditor about these bills?
No, I mean, to be honest, I think that there's not a lot of overlap. I think there's some overlap when it comes to specific issues that have come up in the past. I'd say our office gets a lot of calls with people with concerns about, questionable financial practices at the municipal level, but that's not something that's really come into any of the bills that we've been working on ourselves.
But it could in the future, especially when you get to the enforcement level, if that actually happens. And then
I think
monetary money's coming through. So that might be something that the auditor focuses on, possibly. I'm just asking who else was involved in any of these discussions. Who else has come in to support you on your testimony?
The auditor has been supportive in the past. He was around. He was part of the original coalition.
That's what I thought. Right.
Yeah, as well as the Secretary of State, by the way, that they were both supportive when in the initial 2017 bill. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we had a pretty broad coalition of folks, including the ACLU and League of Women Voters and the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. We had a pretty diverse group of folks that were pushing for that initial legislation.
What legislators, if you remember, were part of that group? Were there any who were assisting you, Ben?
Yeah, Senator Polina and Senator White, Jeanette White,
Right.
were the two sponsors of that bill originally. They also sponsored subsequent bills like the statewide code of ethics bill later on. And, even though they weren't signatories on it, there were other senators that were in the Senate Government Operations Committee at the time, including Senator Clarkson, who was very supportive of the bill. So there are some folks in the Senate side in particular that were involved early on.
Did the mayor's coalition get behind you, or did they stay out of it completely?
I think that there was some support from certain mayors back in 2017. They weren't formally part of the coalition, but I do remember. I think Mayor Weinberger had verbally supported it at the time.
Right. So I'm going to give you all like a 30-second close it up, because you've been fantastic. And I'm hoping that you're going to come back as we progress through this, because I'm hoping also that you do end up getting the monetary support you need so that you can actually put together the appropriate commission that was designed. And I like what you're doing, and I don't think you can do it without money. And I don't like the idea that, there's a manipulation of the money. But then again, I've been in there, so I know how they do it. So does everybody want to just take like 30-second, one more time, who you are, recap, and if you want the public to do anything, feel free. This is your venue to say, get out there and support us. Who wants to go first?
Sure.
I probably have the least specific to say about this, but I can close with, I have my fingers crossed. Vermont has been a case study in how to do an ethics office the right way, really up until the last, 6 to 9 months. So I'm hopeful. I have my fingers crossed that Vermont can continue in the same direction it's been going.
Okay. Christina?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that I think that one thing that's very important is for the public to make their voices heard, because we kind of end up in a situation where we're debating these ethics bills where we kind of have the ethics commission who's trying to represent everyone. Then we have, kind of separate lobbying groups. We have a lot of people we have specific groups that have a lot of weight when it comes to swaying the ethics discussion. But what would be really useful is to have members of the public reach out to the legislators and express what they want to see happen, because that is the voice that in its pure form is missing when we're giving testimony or discussing it before the legislature. So really having the members of the public reach out and say, this is what I want to see happen. I want to see the Ethics Commission funded. I think, independent oversight is important. I think that it's really important to have the same rules apply to everyone equally. That includes the legislative branches and the judiciary and the executive branch. Then that's what can really make a difference.
Excellent. Ben?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, we see it on our communication channels, like when we talk about ethics and government accountability, and people are shocked at the fact that H1 was even introduced, drawing parallels between what's happening at the federal level and what's happening in this particular piece of legislation. So I would definitely say, if this is something that concerns you, reach out to your legislator, let them know, particularly in the House, but the Senate too. They need to hear from you. They need to hear that you're paying attention and that you have a certain expectation of how your public officials are conducting themselves.
This is fantastic. I am so thrilled to have all of you experts here, and I hope you will be willing to come back again. This has been Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. Thank you to the Ethics Commission and to Ben Kinsley of Campaign for Vermont. You heard it out there, so the people of Vermont, get out there and start supporting your positions, speak out, reach out to your legislators, and let's make ethics really happen in Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.